Hi, my name is Alexander, and today I'm going to walk you guys through my presentation on the fall of Rome. And through this presentation, I hope to uncover what went wrong in ancient Rome, why it collapsed, and the reasons as to why or why not it would be considered an apocalypse. So we're going to start off with a area of interest and why I found this project interesting. So over my March spring break, I got the opportunity to go to Rome, visit some family, and I took this photo. I took a bunch of these photos, but this one was on top of the Vittoriano building, which is a war monument built in the 1800s, but it has a nice view and it overlooks the Roman Forum down here and Palatine Hill over here. Um, but what is surprising around here in the Roman Forum, especially where you get these ancient buildings and ancient columns and marble work and stone masonry, is that they seemingly disappeared into thin air over the course of the fall of the Roman Empire and the centuries that preceded it. So, what ended the Roman legacy? What did life look like in Rome after the territories that the empire occupied fell with the empire in the 400s? So here's another overview of the Forum looking down from Palatine Hill. This is the Vittoriano monument, a very big, huge monument built in the 1800s, but that is not of concern right now. So the Roman Forum here is where the Senate buildings were. It is right across from the Colosseum, which is over this way towards the Colosseum, this way towards where the Senate buildings would have been, and the Forum, where the heart of the city was. So we have marble buildings everywhere, advanced construction. These things are um, 20, 30 feet high. And here we have an example of what the Forum would have looked like in its heyday. So we have some of the same arches that are still visible, some of the same columns and obelisks and palaces and the Colosseums back there. Marvelous architecture that was seemingly lost overnight. And here we have a building diagram. So the Forum would have been here in this area. The Temple of Jupiter would have been here. The Colosseum, which is still present. Palatine Hill over here. And where the Vittoriano building is somewhere over here right now. So what you are walking on when you visit the streets of Rome is relatively the same street layouts, but after the Dark Ages and when the peasants kind of came in during the medieval ages and the Renaissance and the Enlightenment eras, is they would build on top of these foundations that were already present in Rome. And they would use that to build on top of because there were foundations and brick and mortar work that they could build off of. So you're really walking on top of all these ancient buildings when you walk in Rome. They seemingly vanished underneath your feet. And the reason for this was the sedimental deposition from the river Tiber over here, which would have flooded and basically deposited sediment, and over hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, it would have buried, this entire place. You can actually go into the Circus Maximus, which is in this area right here, and you can view parts of the stands that would have housed, or sat rather, 30,000 people, and they're underground. You can walk, a story underground and see these stands and the entrances just the way they were at the time of the Romans. It was buried so far that this is a church, but it was an old Roman building at one point that was built on top of. But the mud level after excavation in the 1700s and 1800s would have came up to right about there. And here we have a good example of a beautiful mosaic design that is being uncovered by this worker here, and also a photo or a drawing of the Colosseum that was done before restoration work sometime in the 18th century over here. So it was buried and forgotten about, but at one point it was one of the most advanced ancient empires on Earth. Ancient technologies included Roman concrete, which was a mixture of volcanic ash, lime, and water, which made a mortar. It wasn't really a concrete because it was a mortar that was layered, and they used this mortar to make the Pantheon building, which is a huge, huge, monumentous dome um, that rivals even domes of similar size today. Um, they had massive brick furnaces used to make all these bricks that you see here in the aqueduct, which is another technological innovation in and of itself, which was used to transfer water from the mountains into urban areas. Um, and this is the Temple of Jupiter right here in the background at the Forum. And this is without mention of military strength through legions and armies that would have conquered Europe, art, sculpture, governance, the Senate, philosophy, examples of Cicero and Aurelius, Marco Aurelius, and highways and roads that would have connected the empire. It's one of the most advanced at any time, but it all disappeared. In 476, scholars point to this year being the year of the fall of Rome, when Vandals, Goths, Visigoths, and other barbarians and Germanic tribes sacked the empire, sending Rome and the previous territories that the empire occupied back into the primitive Dark Ages. Here's an excellent photo, an artistic rendering done in the 1800s, I believe, of the, what it might have looked like living at the time of the sacking of Rome, and you have some barbarians here killing people and fun things and whatnot. Well, here we have a study um, conducted, and it shows first of all, a table, figure 1 here, shows a general decline after the fall of Rome in the year 476. And, we initially start and then we decline before we get into the Black Death, which killed many more people in the 1300s. But there was a decline in mortality and a decline in population. And one thing that the study did find was that the diets of peasants living in the Middle Ages was substantially different than Romans. Romans who would have lived in these dense, industrious cities with limited access to farmland and wild game actually consumed less meat than medieval peasants, which occupied more rural villages. So, these peasants in the Middle Ages after the fall of Rome would have had access to hunting and fishing, presumably more so than the Romans who were, in apartment buildings in the cities, which led to the peasants in the Middle Ages living a shorter life, exposed to the elements, yes, but also having broader statutes and bigger standings physically. They were taller, they were wider, they were stronger too, probably. More evidence in agriculture and the things that they ate. This study shows a difference between farming techniques before Rome fell and after Rome fell. So what the Romans made a lot of in their empire and in Britain, in which the study takes place, is they would have made a lot of gloom wheats, which were these very fibrous, shelled, hard to harvest, hard to process wheats. They were required a process of winnowing and threshing to remove the husks and get to the edible part of the bread or the edible part of the wheat. But what the peasants grew was this stuff over here, which was free threshing wheats, and these were easily able. They made bread with this stuff, but this was much more easily processed, and it didn't require all the labor-intensive processes that would have come with making the gloom wheats that the Romans enjoyed. So they lost the technology to make this stuff in large quantities here, and subsequently moved to these uh, less labor-intensive, less processing-intensive, free threshing wheats is what this study covered. You can kind of see the representation of it on the graph over here. Anecdotally, what I noticed in Rome was a decline in culture and technology. Here we have two artistic renderings of an example that we have in the Middle Ages here, which would have been a manuscript of a Lord's book, sort of a primitive artwork. It's not as sophisticated as what we would have seen, thousands of years earlier in ancient Rome. So this is a statue of Laocoon and his sons. It's a marble sculpture that depicts a Trojan priest and his sons being strangled by serpents sent by a Greek goddess in Greek mythology. But this was in the Vatican Museum. Very fine piece of artwork. So what went wrong? Here I look at a study that analyzes some things that could have gone wrong in the Roman Empire leading to its decline. So we had a climate crisis, or at least the potential for a climate crisis, that led northern barbarians to get hungry and irritated and see the wealth of the Roman Empire and want to have it. And we have a demographic crisis, Malthusianism, which is what we covered in class, where we have a linear production of food contrasted by a exponential growth in population that led to some of the declining populations at the late stages of the empire. And we have political crisis too. Things were not going well in the Roman Senate, and Brutus killed Caesar, which led to instability and objections to tyranny, arguably, in the Roman governance. So we have some economic issues here, and the authors lay out some arguments to economic instabilities in the Roman Empire, from slavery and the abuse thereof, um, which made the enslaved peoples unhappy and willing to revolt and join the barbarians, presumably. Um, the introduction of barbarians into society by numerous Roman emperors. For example, Probus put, around 100,000 barbarians to Thrace. Constantius placed many, many Franks around northern, French people, Franks, around the Northern Empire. He introduced them into the empire. And Constantine brought in about 300,000 Sarmati. And the net result was a weakening of the social fabric of the Roman Empire. These people didn't assimilate well, they had different cultural values, and didn't like the empire very much. Um, the East, however, survived. Here we have the Byzantine Empire, which lasted arguably until the sacking of Constantinople during the Crusades in 1453. Um, some factors that were presented, I didn't have the source here, but I forgot that. But some factors that the author presented here was a strong defense. Constantinople was a navy-involved city. It had many ports and a strong navy and strong defenses and strong walls and strong cultural continuity, and a part of that was the introduction of Christianity. Constantine legalized Christianity, and logically in Constantinople, the city that was named after Constantine, Christianity would have been a very unifying and identity enriching factor in the strengthening of the society. So, what I think generally over the collapse of Rome was that it was not so much an apocalypse in the traditional sense, or in the neo-apocalyptic sense that everything is permanently ended, but I think it was a disaster, certainly, and a cultural regression in arts and technology, but one that was overcome.